Ta-da! There was no elegant way to step into the shot. So, hey, how's it going, everybody? Steve Runner here for Runcast TV. And this morning, or afternoon, or night, whenever you're seeing this, I am going to go over some of the things that I have in my runner's library. I keep a fairly large, medium list of books that I like to read. And these are books that I read over and over again. Some are new, some are older. But I just thought I'd give you an idea of some of the books that are in my runner's library. So we got to start off with Dr. George Sheehan, of course. And this is a book that I highly recommend. It's called Running and Being. I consider myself sort of a disciple of Dr. Sheehan. His philosophy, his way of thinking, his way of training. He was a great cardiologist and a great asset to our sport. And everything that I've ever read of Dr. Sheehan, I find myself nodding my head in agreement. Dr. Sheehan, Running and Being, The Total Experience is a fantastic book, and I highly recommend it. Speaking of Dr. Sheehan, one of his last books was Going the Distance. This is kind of a tough book to get a hold of. I had to pay a little extra for this one. But Dr. Sheehan passed away, and this was a book that he wrote, a series of essays near the end of his life when he knew he was dying. And it's really a good reflection on the importance of life and how running is incorporated into that, in being what we call a good animal. One Man's Journey to the End of His Life by Dr. George Sheehan. Other books, some things that I've talked about on the show, Personal Best, This Running Life, another great book by Dr. Sheehan. Then we get into some other things like Running to Win, which I recently just did an entire episode of my podcast, FdipVid024, at steverunner.com regarding this book. Fantastic book, and highly recommended. Now, moving on to some other things. Books that I'm always going through, and you can see I have a series of bookmarks in here. This is The Lure of Running by Dr. Tim Noakes. It's fairly thick, has a lot of research information, and it refers to a lot of research that was done in the area of physiology and sports. Excellent book for doing research about training methods, VO2 max, and how to properly eat for duration sports. The Lure of Running by Dr. Tim Noakes. Then there's books like, let's see here, Jeff Galloway. A couple of books I'll recommend from Jeff. First one I ever read was Galloway on Running. For anybody that's a new runner, I highly recommend this book, honestly. It's not too thick, it's filled with great information, and really, I find it that it's so fascinating to read this book over and over again. I've been running for 10 years, and I still pull nuggets of information out of this book that's as valid today as it was when I first started running. So for the new runner, excellent piece of material, fantastic book, easy to read, and Jeff Galloway is an Olympian, so you can trust him. Now, the other book he wrote was all about marathoning. It's called Jeff Galloway Marathon. I wasn't too thrilled with this book. It's a good read. Some of the narrative kind of grates on you after a while. If you're ever interested in doing the run-walk method, I highly recommend this book. It's a great book, don't get me wrong. It wasn't for me. But I still would recommend it if you're considering running a marathon using the run-walk system, which, by the way, is a proven method for running marathons. And I have a lot to learn about it because I probably could break 4 hours if I would just follow his advice. Jeff Galloway, Marathon, great book. Now, a couple of books that I've talked about on the show and were given to me as gifts. This is a great book. This is Running and Philosophy. Michael Austin is the one that sent this, and he compiled a number of essays all about philosophy and the art of running. It's a great read, and I highly recommend it. It's a series of essays. Kind of reminds you a little bit of the same philosophies that George Sheehan raises, but a little bit deeper than that. And I highly recommend this book. You can find it on Amazon.com. Go to steverunner.com. I have my Apparatus Emptum page where I sell books and things like that, and you can find that here. So, Running and Philosophy, great read. Of course, our friend Chris Russell from the Run, Run, Live podcast has his book, The Mid-Packer's Lament. And it's a fantastic book, essays that Chris has written over the years. Then Coach Dean, my books are falling all over the place. Coach Dean wrote a book called Coach, I Didn't Run Because. It's a fantastic book. You know, has such lines as, "Coach, I didn't run because 2 words, chai tea. I have explosive diarrhea, and I'm afraid my shorts will catch on fire." It's great stuff. It's a fun read, and I highly recommend this book. Short book, but the great thing about this is it gives you things that you might be saying yourself as you procrastinate in getting out on the road. I see myself in way too many of these examples. First marathons. For anybody that's considering running a first marathon or wants to relive the experience they had of their first marathon, this is a fantastic book. It's assembled by Gail Weishi-Kezelbeck. I'm pronouncing that wrong. But it's got some great entries in here, including a section that was written by Emil Zatopek, which is an amazing read to see what an elite runner like, and a legend like Emil Zatopek felt when he ran his first marathon. And then we get into some other books, like this is a book that I kind of like. It's you don't see it too often. It's Tim Van Wagner, In the Long Run. It's a book that's centered around a character, it's fiction, who's running a marathon, and in the act of running that marathon, he is visited by ancestors from the American Civil War. As a Civil War buff myself, somebody that's interested in that kind of thing, I thought it was a great read. It's an easy-to-read book, but kind of an interesting story, and you will definitely recognize yourself in here if you're a distance runner. Can't forget the classic book by John Parker. John L. Parker's Once a Runner is an American classic. This is a piece of literature that if you are a runner, you will love this book. I highly recommend it. He's just come out with a sequel to this book, but you need to read this first and take your time with it. I don't know, there's some of the passages that are within this book makes you want to go out for a run so badly. Once a Runner by John L. Parker. And then there's a great book that I did a podcast on, Duel in the Sun. This tells the story, of course, of Alberto Salazar and Dick Beardsley and their marathon, one of the greatest American marathons of all time, run at the Boston Marathon. And it's a fantastic book. It's one of those books that I sat down to read thinking I'd, take a week or so to get through, and I couldn't put it down. I didn't get to bed till 3 o'clock that morning. Fantastic read. Alan Stiletto has a short story called The Loneliness of the Long-Distance Runner, which is another one of those European classic books that, it's a great story. It's about a kind of a shady character and how he uses running to show other people that he's not a tool for society, I guess. It's a great book, and I highly recommend it. I want to go through some of these pretty quickly because we're running out of time, but a book that I'll be talking about probably in a year or two on my podcast is called Chasing the Hawk. This was written by Dr. George Sheehan's son, and it reveals things about Dr. George Sheehan that you've never heard about, good and bad. But it makes the point that Dr. Sheehan was just a regular guy. I mean, he's not a saint. None of us are. But in a way, he is. And you really have to understand the entire story of Dr. Sheehan by reading this. It's a little bit biographical, and it certainly talks about, this was written by his son, Andrew. And Andrew had some problems growing up with a father like Dr. George Sheehan. And I think when you read this book, you get to really know the man. And, it's surprising, sometimes disappointing, but it's a great read, and it really sheds some light and makes Dr. George Sheehan, I think, more lovable in the end, because you see what he's gone through his entire life, good and bad. He made some bad choices, but this is a good book to tell the true, full story. So that's what I have in my running library. I'm missing a lot of things, like Advanced Marathoning by Pete Bitzinger and Scott Douglas. I don't have all that much time, but I wanted to give you a sample of some of the things that I have in my running library. Hopefully that inspires you to buy a few things. And isn't this exciting that I can use my hands? For Runcast TV, I'm Steve Runner, reminding you, I don't know what to do with my hands. I'm not into this TV thing. Run long and paper.